As journalists and television hosts, scripts are a lifeline. Each newscast, each story, it all revolves around a script.
But now it's time to go unscripted. That means we're not just going off script, we're throwing out the script altogether.
Each week, we're joined by fellow Farm Journal hosts and editors to peel back the layers on stories we've shared throughout the week.
Unscripted. It's real, it's raw, it's entertaining, and it's your chance to meet the personalities behind the personalities. I'm Tyne Morgan.
And I'm Clinton Griffiths. Welcome to Unscripted. No script this week, Tyne. Absolutely none. And I think most of the week has just been fast and furious.
Yeah, I think you're gonna have to carry the ball on this one. I'm getting over being sick. So it's part of travel. 'Tis the season. Clinton, it felt like negative 30 degrees here in Kansas City with the wind chill this week. I don't have a better word to describe this weather other than dumb. It's just dumb. I'm over it. I don't understand why James hasn't booked a trip to the Caribbean yet for us to just get a little bit of sunshine in our lives. I'm a little bitter about that at this point. But this is the second time getting sick this winter, and I'm up in my vitamin C regimen. And Clinton, I think maybe I just have not consumed enough milk this winter.
I think that's probably it. 100%.
In China, that's what they said. They said that in order to I don't know if it was cure COVID or help, build up your immune system to fight COVID during 2020, they told people it was consuming dairy, consuming milk. And so, we consume a lot of dairy at our house, but I'm going to up the intake this weekend.
Time to get on it. Well, kind of to help us along with that, I think, and to give us a little perspective, our guest this week, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. We've got a phenomenal guest. In fact, why don't we go ahead and bring him out? We've got Gregg Doud. He's the president and CEO at the National Milk Producers Federation. And he also, Greg, you had a previous role where you were the chief ag negotiator under Trump 1.0, working out of the United States Trade Representative's office. You've seen some stuff, as they say.
Well, my standard line is I've been in Washington over 32 years now, which means I'm of absolutely no value to anyone in the outside world any longer. That's my standard.
That's good.
Greg,
that's good.
You're from Kansas, right? This cold weather, does this bother you, or are you just like, this is nothing like?
No. I think, Tyne, you got it. This is stupid. This is stupid. Well, I read somewhere that we have polar vortex in the U.S. every other year, and we've had something like 11 of these this year where this thing is dipped. So it's just, and apparently we're not done yet. We may have one more here on the East Coast within the next couple of weeks. So
that's what we heard at Top Producer this week. Eric Snodgrass was talking about that cold front and possibly Clinton. How much snow did you say he thought was? I mean, I know these models, it's far out, but how much snow?
They're talking like 20 inches at some point in the middle of the country by next week. So I don't know. We'll see. I think it depends on if it gets cold enough, whether it's rain or snow. So we're going to have to cross our fingers. Maybe it'll just be some good moisture for folks as they get ready to start planting. Greg, where did you grow up? You grew up in cattle, livestock, doing that?
So Mankato, Kansas, north central Kansas, right in the middle of the state up on the Nebraska border. I own a part of the farm that's about 5 miles east of the geographic center of the 48 in Lebanon, if you know where that is. But we wheat, corn, soybeans, alfalfa, a lot of hogs, and about 50 head of cows when I was a kid. And then when I went to college, mysteriously the hogs disappeared. I don't know why that happened in the mid 80s, but that's always a fun subject at home. But I was 4-H and showed steers and showed hogs, was a FFA state officer in Kansas, AGR. So the full kind of ag pedigree. Yep.
In K-State, right? You
K-State. Yep. Got a little purple on today. Bachelor's in animal science, master's in ag econ.
So, I can see that sign over your shoulder there. Looks like there's a power cap behind you there.
There we go. That's exactly right.
So prior to joining National Milk Producers Federation, I mean, Greg, what I've been told is once you understand dairy policy, it's time for you to exit the business. That is the hardest policy and system to understand. And so did you know much about dairy before you got into National Milk Producers Federation, or what made you choose that path?
Well, I didn't really choose it. I was kind of recruited, and I will tell you, my only street cred in dairy is that I was actually on the K-State dairy cattle judging team. And in fact, my claim to fame is I actually won the Fort Worth Collegiate Dairy Cattle Judging Contest in 1988.
Here we go. All right, here we
Did
go.
Did you get a belt buckle?
Any bit of street cred, but that's about it. So, yeah.
Greg, when you won, did you get a belt buckle?
That's a good question.
I don't know. I don't even remember what I got. I got all these little trinkety things, and I don't even remember what they were. That was a long time ago. But
See,
yeah,
that's the
Dave,
best thing about
and then-
yeah, that
yeah. And then I went up to the World Dairy Expo, and we just got shellacked. I remember that.
Those Wisconsin kids worked you over,
Yeah,
did
that was not a good day. So, yeah.
that was not a good day. And then, Greg, but you have more street cred than that in dairy, because I mean, we'll get into this in a minute when we're talking tea. But I look back to Trump 1.0 administration
Yeah.
and the negotiations of U.S. Mexico Canada agreement, and I kept hearing, and I remember Michael Dykes setting me down and saying, "Listen, we will not have an agreement with Canada and Mexico if dairy is not included and at the top of the list." And I walked out of that meeting, Greg, thinking, yeah, right. I mean, dairy, it's never been a priority for any administration. I mean, it's on the list, but not the top priority. And lo and behold, he was right. And so I give you street cred for that, because you guys said, listen, we're not having a deal unless dairy is included. And we have that at the top of the list. And that's exactly what happened. Wasn't it the last thing to get worked out?
Well, yeah, it was really tough. And it was, President Trump on the campaign trail that he was up north somewhere, and he really got kind of pinned down on this. And he was like, all right, we're going to deal with this. And so I'll digress and tell a little story, because it's one of my favorite stories. And Bob will laugh if he was on here now listening to it. Is my very first day on the job. And so it was 49 weeks between the time I got out. So all this kind of time right now gives me PTSD a little bit, because it was 49 weeks between the time Ambassador Robert Lighthizer, the U.S. Trade Representative, you saw him on 60 Minutes here the other night, between the time he offered me the job and the time I walked in the building. 49 weeks to get confirmed. So we are moving at warp speed now compared to those days. My first day on the job, it was the great Sharon Bomer, Roger Wetzel, two of the greatest minds in the U.S. government and agriculture, and myself. We sat down with Bob and to talk about Canada and dairy. The first afternoon I was there. Wow. And Sharon gets started talking about Canada and what they're doing. And Bob goes, whoa. Before we get started, I just have one question. How does a U.S. dairy farmer get paid? And of course, if you're a dairy farmer and you hear the story, you automatically just laugh out loud, because most dairy farmers really can't even explain it.
Nope.
Right. No, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's not really possible to explain it. And so I kind of hem-hawed around, Sharon hem-hawed around, Roger hem-hawed around, and Bob was like, look, you are my crack A team of the best people in the U.S. to do ag trade stuff, and you don't know how dairy farmer gets. Get out of my office. He kicked us out of his office.
No way. The first day.
No way.
Sharon was so mad. And you have to know Sharon. She is a perfectionist. She is I call her the GOAT. She is the greatest of all time doing this. Enormously brilliant person. She was up all night with USDA, and she came back the next afternoon, slammed down on the desk in his office. It was a 15 bullet point, one page, front and back. These are the steps and how a dairy farmer gets paid.
Oh my gosh.
And Bob looked at that, and that son of a gun he had this little smirk on his face. It's like, this is a little more complicated than what I thought. It's like, you turkey, you knew the whole time. You were just setting us up here. But his message, and it was well received, was you walk in here, you bring your A game.
Yeah, right.
And that's that set the tone for the rest of the time there. And I'll tell you what, when Bob Lighthizer was in a meeting and you walked in there, you brought your A game, and it was time to get down to brass tacks. And we taught him Canada and dairy, and I mean, he fought, and it was quite a deal. But at the end of it, after it was all over, and months later, we would sit in his, of the deputies, we would sit in his office in the evening and visit, and he goes, I kind of know this dairy stuff. I was like, boss, you darn sure do. He learned it, and he did a heck of a job. But the problem with this whole thing is you can't write a law that prevents somebody from robbing a bank. You
Right.
can't write a law that comes up with all the contingencies of where somebody might go with this. And so this is where we're at. Is the Canadians have looped around here and renamed Class 7, Class 4B, or whatever they've done. And so we've got to revisit this again and make sure that we do everything we can to make this straight, because, they're ornery up there in dairy. They just are. They always have been.
So, Greg, you would agree that it is the Canadians are not necessarily following or living up to the agreement of USMCA.
And they know full well they're not. That's just
Right.
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 So, and a lot of it is in the way they allocate their tariff rate quotas. So a tariff rate quota is you get to send so much quantity of a certain product into Canada at zero tariff. And then if you exceed that, then your tariff jumps up to 25% or whatever it is, whatever you negotiated.
Mhm.
But there's the real tricky part of this is Canada can allocate who gets to procure or use that tariff rate quota. Well, what they've really done is allocate it to our competitor. So they're allocating it to the processors that are using their own product in Canada versus the retailers or somebody that would buy our product and directly and use it. Pretty clever on their part is the way they're gaming the system up there. So, they're like, we're allocating it, but nobody's using it. Son of a gun.
Uh-huh. Interesting.
That leads in,
Interesting.
though, I think, Clinton, that leads into our first segment, because I've got
Absolutely.
questions. I've got a lot of questions. Let's go into talking tea. Okay, Greg, now that we see the threat of tariffs back on the table, are we going to see the Trump administration put these tariffs on March 1st? We went from February 1st, now pushing it to March 1st. I hear some arguing that, listen, this is just kind of a precursor to renegotiating USMCA, and this is Trump's way of renegotiating that agreement. Do you think that that's the case, or is this a totally separate agenda item for him?
I think you will intentionally never know the answer to that. That's what I think.
You will intentionally never. That is like the best line ever. You will intentionally never know the answer, and it seems like that's how he negotiates, right? Like,
And
throw a bunch of stuff out there, and then just let's get to some sort of agreement.
you saw, was it at CPAC this week, where the vice president, JD Vance, explained the art of President Trump and the way he negotiates is he never takes anything off the table. Somebody comes up to you and says, well, is this farm for sale? Well, give me the price. It's all negotiable. That's the way he views the world. And he's never going to let you know really where you're at until the bottom line. He's a master at it, I think, and I think Bob was, I loved Bob the way he did it as well, because he was a prosecutor. He litigated the case in his head. He knew where the other side was going before they knew where they were going. And that combination was tremendous. And so I think, I said the answer to your question is yes and no. I mean,
Who was a better negotiator in your mind? If you had to put him, I mean, the president's the president, so I know he probably trumps in a way, but who was a better negotiator, Bob Lighthizer or President Trump?
well, so there's great history there
Hmm.
of, you go back 30 some years to the Oprah Winfrey show. And Oprah Winfrey asked Donald Trump, well, you're going to be president, who would be your trade negotiator? Because obviously, they would have to be pretty good. And he goes, well, I would be my own trade negotiator. There isn't anybody as good as I am. That's what he said. You remember, if you go back and look at that. So the fact that Bob Lighthizer was his trade negotiator is saying something. Let me just tell you. And I got to know Bob, and he was the toughest son of a gun there ever was. And you go back and watch him on 60 Minutes, and that's how he is, and realize he's just tough as nails. But what I saw Bob do in a negotiation that there's I won't get into the story. He talks about it in his book is he would just stop talking. Like for the next 5 minutes of this interview, I would just doodle on my pad and not say anything. And what would happen to you guys? Well, you guys couldn't stand it. You would just have to blurt out. And that's what the other side of the table would do every single time. It was unbelievable how just ruthless he was.
Wow.
In terms of human interaction.
I had no idea. I hate silence.
Oh,
Absolutely hate silence. So I would be
yeah,
so uncomfortable.
Trying to fill in or talk yourself into something or
yeah,
whatever.
exactly.
You know, in fact, Greg, my wife tells me that all the time. She says, "You need to stop talking." And like we get it, any kind of negotiation, she's like, "Just don't say anything." Or just yes and no from you. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to be nice and share, fill the room. But that's who I am. And she's
So,
a pretty ruthless
my
negotiator.
wife is a far better negotiator than I am. She's
That's right.
the stories I could tell. She's an eye doctor, runs her own business for over 30 years, dealing with insurance companies and
Oh,
health companies every day. She's ruthless. I mean, and she has to be. But Bob, the way Bob was just. I mean, he was so good, so
Greg,
good.
Greg, what was the and maybe this dovetails into that, but what was the toughest negotiation that you sat in on in the room on? Was there anyone that stands out as like, oh my gosh,
that's a
this
good
was
question.
unbelievable?
Well, the Chinese stuff was very, very difficult. So that was 33 negotiating sessions for me on the ag section, hundreds of hours.
33?
Yeah. And in the 2019, the course of a year, we started in January, finished up late in the year that year. And one of those would be in DC or in Beijing, would be a 10 or 12-hour day, would be one of those
Oh my
33. And then we would go 7 in the morning till noon or 7 at night to midnight, because we were like 12 hours apart, so we would go back and forth, so somebody didn't have to be up every morning or late every night. So that was brutal, and that was 23 pages of text. We argued over every sentence 3 different times. The most brutal negotiation was over the translation. We argued at one point for an hour over what one word meant.
Wow.
It was
Just one word. Was the language barrier difficult?
unbelievable.
I was about to
Yeah.
ask.
Oh, tremendously difficult to overcome, especially when you were translating that. And I'll just tell you. So the word was maintains.
Okay.
And so in the Chinese language, when you say Tyne maintains the right to wear high heels, when she's doing whatever.
Darn
Uh,
right.
Yeah, the Chinese interpretation of that is, well, what do you mean? These are my high heels. You can't tell me that I get to keep my high heels. That's outrageous. That's completely the wrong way to talk to anybody from China. And we're like, well, that's not what we mean. Not what we mean. And
Yeah.
the vice minister spoke very good English, and he was like, I know you know this, but he said, you got to understand, in China, this word ain't gonna wash. This isn't gonna work.
Interesting.
So it was things like we would go back and forth, and finally I had a brilliant lawyer sitting next to me, Harvard trained, spoke Mandarin. He went back and rewrote the whole context of the whole thing. A week later, we came back, and the vice minister was like, "Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, no problem."
Wow. And it was
Over
it
the
was
word maintain that we
Yes.
use all the time.
That's one of the story. I have 1,000 of these kind of stories from that. I will tell you though, I found the Brazilians to be very difficult to deal
really
Why?
with. They just never would really be honest with you. That's a polite way to put it.
yeah. Just
Do you
just
think it's because
constantly
Yeah, you
Yeah.
think it's because they've never had to be honest about? I mean, they
No,
just
I think that they know exactly. Their folks were trained killers. Let me tell you.
just also man,
Yeah.
what a job. So were
Yeah.
were you happy with where we ended up on the phase 1 after
Yeah,
all of those hours, 33
so-
sessions and
yeah,
on and on and on?
So if you look at that document, and you can pull it up online, we fixed 57 things in our trading relationship between the U.S. and China. What we did on dairy, it was the biggest piece of it, was unbelievable. And the changes we made and the stories I could tell. Beef was another huge deal. We opened the China market U.S. beef really for the first time ever. And lots of things dealing with the Chinese bureaucracy that we made changes on that we've been waiting 20 plus years to fix. We got a lot of things changed. Great progress there. Are there still some things that we need to work on in biotech, this, that, and the other? Yeah. And I think, honestly, at some point here, President Xi in China and President Trump will sit down again and instruct folks, let's do another one of these. Let's get after this again. And I think we probably will.
So that was my question for you. Do you think they will pick back up where phase one left off, or do you think you immediately go to phase two, Greg?
Well, phase two would involve things like China getting rid of their state trading enterprises and then the Communist Party influence in businesses in China. So that's probably a little bit of a bridge too far. But I think, they're very transactional, and I think we are too to some respect. And so I think there's a deal to be had there. And I think the thing that I tell people all the time is after the phase one agreement, we were talking to China at USTR every day, fixing all kinds of little pieces along the way and getting commerce to flow. This was very tenuous when we first started. A year later, we developed a pretty good rapport, really good rapport, I would say. And we were making great progress. And then, of course, when the administration changed, that all changed, and that dialogue all went away. So I think, that was really frustrating to me to see. And I think there'll be efforts when we get Ambassador Greer Jameson over there at USTR to get the wheels back on the wagon.
One of the things that you mentioned to me at Top Producer this week was about President Trump and President Xi, and they both like a deal.
That's my sense. I really do think that.
Yeah, you think that they like to have a deal made and really be in some sort of negotiation.
I do.
Yeah.
I think there's great benefit to having the two. It's a good thing to have the two largest economies on earth talking to each other. It's just a good thing.
Does China need a deal? You look at their economy.
For agriculture now, Tyne, you're asking a great question and something that I've given a fair amount of thought here and talking to others now that we are back onto this thing is what would you do in agriculture and another deal with China? And the answer is things are very different today in terms of Chinese demand for agricultural products than they were in 2019. In 2019, China had African swine fever. They lost 40% of their hogs. Their demand for protein, beef, pork, poultry, dairy across the board was nearly insatiable at that point in time. But China would tell you they're not really in the mood of importing meat. They'd rather import the soybeans and make the meal and the corn and feed it themselves and add that value there. And of course, that's the answer that anybody would prefer to do if they could possibly do it. I get all that. Right. But I still think protein is where it's at, not just in China, but around the world. And the reason I think that is because I think that's what U.S. agriculture's advantage is in our ability. The old joke when I gave speeches at Aimpoint, as I said, and that my colleagues loved that were military guys, I said, you have to understand that pigs and chickens are not pigs and chickens. They are little walking piles of corn and soybean meal. That's right.
Description.
You're converting
exactly
this material into that material, and that's what it is. Yeah.
That is exactly what it is. And my point is this: we are really good at that here in the United States. I would argue we're as good at that in dairy as anybody in the world. We just are.
Yeah.
So that's our advantage, combined with technology. And so how we, work to our strengths in the U.S. versus work to what the Chinese, what they want to import and what they don't want to import is where the bid and the offer of the negotiation would be.
We will be right back after a word from our sponsor.
We can't control the weather. We can't affect the global demand for corn and soy. We can't even fix that piece of equipment you swear is still good if you just have the right part. But BASF can offer you 0% financing on our proven, consistent performing fungicides. Our grower finance program is here to help you maximize your yield potential and savings with 0% APR on some of the highest performing fungicides available until March 15th, 2025. Because now more than ever, every dollar counts, and you can't beat 0% financing on innovative corn and soybean fungicides like Revitech fungicide, Revilock fungicide, and Veltima fungicide. Keep more in your wallet while improving your yield potential. Talk to your BASF retailer today about the grower Grower Finance Program to lock in 0% APR. Subject to credit approval, terms and conditions. See BASF Grower Finance Program for details. Always read and follow label directions.
Well, Secretary Rollins was that top producer, and she talked about a number of different things. Of course, pretty fresh on the job here, newly minted, the 33rd Secretary of Ag. Still plenty of things for her to get her arms around, but she spoke to producers. She talked a little bit about trade. In fact, she mentioned India as one of the places, and she made the quote, "I want to go barnstorm the world and work on market access." I think we have a little clip from what she said about trade. Why don't we play that, Zach, and then we can comment on it.
Got 0 trade agreements done in the last 4 years. How does trade fit into your future? I know you're not the USTR, but you'll be working hand in hand with them.
I will. I think I know there's a lot of concern, legitimate concern amongst probably people in this room, I'm guessing, but across the agriculture community. And I understand that concern. And my job is to ensure that as President Trump and our trade representatives are making their decisions, that I am in the room advocating on behalf of our people, on behalf of all of you, to understand exactly where the community is and will continue to be. Having said that, I believe that one of the most important roles that I will play, and one of the roles I'm really excited about, is moving and finding and expanding market access across the world for our products out of this country.
What do you think, Greg? You think that's an opportunity, a realistic opportunity, having sat in that seat and done that?
I think so. Let me walk you through this from my perspective.
Sure.
Number one, let me tell you, I do think that Secretary Rollins is going to be an unbelievable advocate for U.S. agriculture. For folks on the farm, for the whole industry, you name it, soup to nuts. She's going to be our best advocate that we've had in a long, long time. No question about that. But there's a lot to learn, and there's a lot to learn on the international side of the equation. So I was actually on the Senate Ag Committee staff, one of the staffers that was in charge of the trade title of the Farm Bill, and helped get the Undersecretary for Trade position in the Farm Bill. Very proud of that. Working with the senator from Nebraska at the time, Mike Johans, that happened to be the former Secretary of Agriculture, understood the importance of that position at USDA. And the way I've always articulated that position is the ag trade negotiator is new and used car sales. The Undersecretary for Trade is the service department. And if you're going to have a good car dealership, you better have a really good service department. And so that is that role in terms of out there scouring the universe, finding and working with the Foreign Ag Service, working with the cooperators of U.S. Wheat Associates, U.S. Meat Export Federation, U.S. Dairy Export Council, all those folks that have overseas offices and do all that. We've long needed that position. Undersecretary Ted McKinney did a great job out there, scouring the universe for what that is. And then once you scour the universe, you say, okay, here's a deal that we can do, whether it's with Kenya or the UK or whatever the next iteration of it is. That's when the USTR comes in, or the USTR comes in when something's broken and the Undersecretary for Trade can't fix it. Then he turns it over to the black hat guy, and that's the ag trade negotiator.
I was thoroughly impressed with Secretary Rollins. Greg, not only is she very likable, but you can tell that she is tough as nails. And so one thing that a lot of folks probably listening don't know is after, this was a last minute deal. Kudos to the editor of Top Producer that puts on Top Producer Summit, Margie Eckelkamp, for getting Rollins. She was very persistent, and timing worked out where we were able to get Rollins at Top Producer Summit. She came and spoke, as you just saw. That was a quote from when she addressed the crowd. There were no topics that were off limits. We didn't get a note saying farmers can't ask this, farmers can't ask that. Greg, there were no topics that were off limits. But after she spoke, then we had an exclusive interview with her. We'll play a bite from that in just a second. But after that, she asked to meet with a roundtable of farmers. And Greg, those farmers that were in the room, I guarantee you, all of them did not vote for President Trump. It was a mix, a very diverse mix of farmers. And I talked to the farmers after they left the room, and I said, were you impressed? And they were. She took 2 pages of notes. There were a couple things that she had some questions on and asked, well, why aren't we doing this now? and there wasn't a good answer. And she says, I will call the president on the way to the airport. We will see what we can get done as far as an executive order. What we were told at Top Producer Summit, and I want to know if you think this is true. Mary Kate Thatcher, who has been in DC forever, she spoke at Top Producer Summit, and she said, out of all of President Trump's cabinet members, Rollins is probably the closest to Trump. And kind of what I read between the lines is Rollins is President Trump's favorite. Do you think that's the case?
I do. I've heard that. I firmly believe that. I know from her time at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and what she did there, and then she came to the White House as domestic policy advisor, and when that administration ended, they said, my understanding is they said, well, we want you to recreate what you did in Texas nationally, and that was the America First Policy Institute. And what a unbelievable effort. They've spent 4 years, thinking through and developing and understanding in terms of tax policy, regulation, foreign policy, military stuff. That's why they've been able to hit the ground running so hard here, is they had that AFPI group thinking about this. Brooke ran it. So,
Yeah.
I mean,
Greg,
she isn't just an agriculture. She understands ag, but she understands all this other stuff together. And having someone like that, having the president's here now, an advocate for us in agriculture, I said, my opinion is you can't do anything.
Greg, what do you think, in having been there and worked in the first administration, obviously Rollins was in that administration as well, but having been there and gone through a lot of the ag stuff and negotiations, et cetera, what do you think will be the biggest challenges for her to sort through? And I don't know if they're headwinds or if they're people or if it's just trying to get the wheels to move. I don't know what the answer is.
The wheels to move is one. That is a gigantic agency. It's one of the biggest agencies in the U.S. government, and the amount of stuff going on there to wrap your head around. One person can do it, and so you're going to have to glean through a bunch of stuff. And I just saw, stuff overnight. They found that we're not doing that anymore. We got to fix that. There's going to be a whole bunch of stuff here on the trade front, though. I would say this, and I don't want to sound too jaded or cynical, but we've been doing this trade stuff for a long time. All the easy stuff, folks, was done a long time ago. What we have left is really, really hard stuff. And India is really, really hard. I would argue that it's next to impossible. And I know Bob Lighthizer worked on it for a year. I worked with him on it. Oh, just unbelievable. But to me, I'm just going to say this, and this is my own personal opinion. I would love to see us get after the European Union on agriculture.
Really?
So many of the problems that we have around the world in ag trade emanate from those turkeys over there in Brussels. They've given us fits for 50 years. For as far as I'm concerned, President Trump, if you hear this message, U.S. agriculture will hand you the gasoline and the matches. You go after the European Union on agriculture.
Well, even the European farmers in the European Union have not been happy.
Of course they're not happy. They're riding in the streets over there as well. Nobody's happy what these knuckleheads do in Brussels.
So you think that that the EU that is a place where there is very little opportunity to go and make an actual negotiation here.
I've got it here. I'm going to give you some numbers because I'm actually testifying next week in front of House Ways.
Ooh, unscripted. Look, this is unscripted.
Juicy. Greg, we love some tidbits and information before you actually testify about it.
Give you a little preview here.
Love that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
So our dairy trade deficit with the European Union, U.S. dairy, we import $3 billion in dairy from the European Union. We export 167 million.
That's it.
3 billion, 167 million going out. Ag is what is it here? The ag trade deficit, imports minus exports with the European Union, total ag in 2024 was $23.6 billion.
Gee, Merry Christmas. Wow. I mean, I knew it was bad, but I didn't know.
It's beyond bad. It always has been, and it just gets worse. And every time we use technology or we come up with something to try to find a way in through the castle gates over there, they come up with a new regulation to stop us.
Yep. Yep.
And look at what they're doing right now, saying, no, we need all this process-oriented stuff, and you got to do it this way. It's pure protectionism. It always has been. It's indefensible, and it's gotten to a point where not even their own producers can deal with it anymore.
Well, we did see that headline this week, Tyne, where they were saying that they're going to start restricting some products from the U.S. because they feel like farmers are because they've got to meet these standards, and so they're saying, "Well, if you want
Great
to
point.
send stuff to us, well, then you have to
Great
meet them too." Well, that's absolutely protectionism.
By the way, there's nothing in the WTO that's legal about any of that. Just
Okay,
saying.
good to know.
So what is more realistic then? Because you said India has the most potential, but is the biggest problem. What do you think is more realistic? Finding working something out with India or working something out with the EU, knowing all of these roadblocks?
Mm.
That's a great question, Tyne.
Ooh, tough question.
That you stumped me on that one.
Okay. So
But,
they're both of them are problematic. In their
Both of them are
Yeah.
hard.
So, the Indians have the highest tariffs in the world. Remember, if you recall, I hate to go back in a history lesson, but, essentially we had to kick India out of the GATT in order to do the Doha round of the WTO. And they only once they agreed upon those terms did we let them back into the WTO. They've always been a problem. And I don't want to say what I'm about to say is being negative towards the discussion between Modi and President Trump when he was here the other day. But one of the things we did get in agriculture, my understanding is based on the conversation, is that India lowered the tariff on U.S. bourbon from 150 to 100%.
That's the one win.
Well, I don't know if that was the only one, but that was one that we got.
That was a big one.
So
Well-
to let you give you a feel how difficult India is to deal
Oh
with.
my gosh. And Greg, I did not realize how much of a tariff India had on our products.
On agriculture, everything's basically just think of it as 100% across the board.
Well,
Just even.
until the president announced the reciprocal tariffs and gave and showed a chart of India being the number one reason why, I
Oh.
did not realize the scope.
So what we do sell India one agricultural commodity that we do pretty well. What is it, $600-700 million worth of almonds or almonds
Okay.
in California.
Yeah, almonds.
I think the tariff that we pay on that is like 50 or 60 or 65%.
It's still that high.
Yeah.
It's still that high. Wow.
Wow.
And it's about them trying to protect their own farmers, or they just want to keep everything in their own country.
So think of it as 500 million farmers in India that their electricity, their water, their fuel, their fertilizer, their seed is all subsidized. And India wants to keep that out in the country and not let that, if we do anything that, drives rural Indian folks into the cities, that it would overwhelm. So this is the mindset.
Okay.
And I remind people, it was 5 or 6 years ago that India made a modicum of reforms of their domestic agricultural markets. And there was so much unrest over those changes that Modi had agreed upon to make. 3 years later, they had to repeal the law. They couldn't implement it because of how it all ended up in India. So it's, that's the context by which I say what I say with regard to India.
All right, I think we need to go into our next segment real quick. Greg, what the Sigma? You can roll it, Zach. Greg, do you have kids?
Yes,
How old?
27 and almost 24. So out of college, working, doing really well.
Yeah, they're above the what the Sigma pays. But this is what kids that are in high school and middle
Okay.
school, what they use. Kind of what the heck? It's the new.
What in the
terminology.
world? It's I can't believe this is going on.
I think I've
So-
heard of this. Okay.
Yeah, I bet
Okay,
you have.
okay.
In addition to the words like, "Oh, that was fire," things like that. What the Sigma is one of those. Okay, and so I think before we roll a quote from Rollins, I want to pull up the tweet from Secretary Rollins yesterday because Greg, I think you mentioned this. She put a tweet up last night. We had asked her about DOGE and and DOGE being at USDA. We asked her that this week, and she said that she welcomes DOGE coming in. But my question was for her, how much pushback do you even have on DOGE? I mean, there's concerns. DOGE Agriculture or DOGE USDA, I forget what the handle is on X. They put up a quote saying, we want to know what should we investigate? There were a flood of comments, a flood of comments. But there's some concern that some of these farm programs, maybe whenever they start realizing how much payments go out, that may be at risk. Anyway, she found a DEI contract apparently last night that went to Iowa State University, and I think it was DEI and integrated pest management. It was over 300,000, right, Clinton? I'm trying to think how much it
Yeah,
was.
I think that's right. Yeah.
300,000 that they found that they were rescinding. But what I noticed and what I saw in the tweet was she sitting around a room going through these documents, going through these findings. And Greg, my question is, does Secretary Rollins ever sleep?
That's a good question.
You are asking a very legitimate question. And I think it's a question that we ask of our president as well. And the answer, to the best of my understanding, is no.
No.
They work all the time.
Yeah, I think they're just built that way. And that's different than the rest of us are built. And
They say that's
they're,
genetic.
they're brilliant.
That
They're
people are
brilliant.
just genetically predispositioned
Yeah.
to just not get that much sleep. Some people are just wired that way.
I don't have that.
I had
genetic.
my predecessor, the esteemed Dr. Chuck Lambert, former chief economist of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. He could go 48 hours with 2 hours sleep.
Oh, wow. No way.
No way.
And still function?
And function perfectly. Now he would take a little nap in the afternoon and he was on and going again.
No, I could take a little nap in the afternoon. That would be
Yeah.
okay. But
He could go day after day on 2 hours.
that
Now,
is
at some
wild.
point, I'm sure he crashed, but yeah, some people are wired that way, folks. They just are.
Yeah. And
And
she's
in
getting,
Washington, it seems to attract them. I'm telling you.
I was just about to say that tweet was late at night and she's sitting around a room and, there's a room full of people. I didn't see any coffee. I saw one Diet Coke and I'm like, what is fueling these people besides excitement right now? Because my gosh. Okay. I do want to play a quote because we did ask her, Greg, in agriculture, and this is how I phrased the question to her. In agriculture, there's some nervousness about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and the role he's going to play. The nervousness being his comments in the past on glyphosate's poison and some of the other herbicides that we use. That's on record. And we know where he stands on some of that. And some will argue it's not science-based. But Greg, there's also some excitement with his whole agenda to make America healthy again. Specifically, he's touted using beef tallow and animal fat instead of other oils and things like that. But I did ask her how she is going to work with RFK Jr., considering there is so much nervousness in the ag community. And I think we can play that clip.
I know there's a lot of concern in the community, and I understand that with the confirmation of Secretary Kennedy, RFK Jr. as HHS, some of the things he has said in the past, I know would be, if implemented, would be devastating for a lot of our farming community. And I believe, though, and maybe it's the optimist in me and in the relationship that he and I have built since he joined the team in August of 2024, that I have found him to be extremely reasonable. I know he went through the entire process like I did in meeting with all the senators. The Republican senators had a lot of questions for him. There were a lot of ag state senators, like the senators from here and around the Midwest, but all around the country. And he was, I believe, very truthful and sincere when he said that we will work this together. Will we have disagreements? Probably so. But when we do, and this is I think the benefit of having been in the last West Wing for 3 years and having worked with President Trump so closely, when those big disagreements happen, we just take them to the president. We go into the Oval Office, we sit in front of the Resolute desk, the president sits behind, we each make our case. And so, there may be a few of those in the coming months and years, but I am more confident than ever before that he understands the implications, at least a lot of them, of what would happen if some of these more bold ideas of his, if I use those words, if they get implemented. So I will be there to fight for what we know is right for the ag community. But also, let me finish with this. I do think what Secretary Kennedy represents is a new day in America, that we do have a chronic childhood obesity disease issue in this country. that a focus on nutrition is really, really important. I'm looking forward to working with him together on things like the food stamp program and the nutrition programs out of USDA. HHS has the Federal Drug Administration, FDA. So we're going to be forced to work together, whether we want to or not, on dietary guidelines and other things. So there's a lot of work ahead between the two of us, but I remain optimistic that we will get to the right place for our ag community.
Greg, this is my takeaway from that. If they get in a disagreement, she's taking it straight to the president. Kennedy's making his case. Rollins making her case. The president can decide. And hearing what I did this week, that Rollins is President Trump's favorite, I think that bodes well for ag.
So I would say this to U.S. agriculture, having a little bit of experience in all of this, is bring your data.
Yeah.
This is going to be a very data-driven conversation, particularly as it relates to herbicides and pesticides and antibiotics. The data exists on these topics. Some of it's good, some of it needs improvement. Certainly from what we do, we've got better technology out there that we need to work with our government to get approved. And I've always been critical of the FDA in terms of how slow they are in approving new technologies for us in agriculture. And one area in particular is with regard to transgenic animal traits. If we don't get on the stick and get going on this, it's just going to go to other countries, and other countries are going to have the jump on us. We need U.S. agriculture, all of us need to be better prepared to have that debate and discussion regarding the data. And we need to start, I would argue, we need to start that conversation not with our two new cabinet level officials, but with our members of Congress, and make sure that they understand the answers to these questions as well, and congressional staff, et cetera. There is a lot of work that has to be done with regard to education, with regard to the use of technology in agriculture.
Yeah, Greg, with your current job, obviously working with dairy producers, I mean, obviously she's talking about, the food pyramid and dietary guidelines, and I mean, all of that is really important for dairy producers.
Oh, it's right in our wheelhouse.
Remain in the middle of this.
So I'm thrilled about RFK Jr. and Nina and the big fat lie and all this, and the notion of the fact that fat in milk is not a health risk, for Pete's sake. Come on. And I will tell you now we'll provide you a little background from the last year that I've been in this job. He's no longer there as of the last week. You had a guy at the Food and Drug Administration that I met with him to have this conversation about labeling of things that aren't milk that we were calling milk. And he had the notion of telling me to my face that some of these non-milk milks were nutritionally equivalent to milk. And I couldn't believe it. I'll be honest with you. Shocking to me. It infuriated me. And
what do you say to that? Like,
well,
no, you're
I had
wrong.
a medical doctor sitting next to me that explained, no, that's actually not the case. You need to be a little careful there. He honestly believed that. And so, in my estimation and my reaction to my membership is, whose fault is that?
Right.
Is that his fault, or is that our fault for not getting our job done in terms of understanding this? And we had terminology in the recent WIC rule in this previous administration where they made changes to the WIC rule, and in the rule they actually used the term plant-based cheeses and yogurts. And I'm like, really? We're gonna go down that road with regard to nutrition with our kids?
Right.
So I welcome this debate and this discussion. Getting whole milk back in schools, we just passed that out of committee this week. Last year, that passed 330 to 99. A majority of both parties in the House of Representatives agreed that we need to get whole milk and 2% milk back in our schools in this country. Holy moly, is this...
Yeah.
I mean, I can't think of something that's more make America healthy again than this topic.
Now, Greg, this may not be healthy, but I the doorbell rang last night after I got home. I went and opened the door as my 17-year-old, and he's walking in from baseball practice, holding a half gallon of whole chocolate milk that he has drank half of on the way home from practice. And I'm like, what are you doing with this gallon of chocolate milk? And he's like, oh, I just was craving some milk, so I just went and got it. I'm like, okay. I was like, can we put it in a glass? Maybe we just put it in a glass. We don't just drink it
Just out of
straight
the
out of the
jug.
jug, Greg.
But
That's where we're at my house.
but
I
Greg,
have
I
no
mean,
problem with that. By the way,
oh, go ahead.
this last year, for the first time in 30 some years, fluid milk consumption is actually now on the uptick in the United States.
It's
So
great.
I think this whole conversation is causing us is to turn a little corner here, and it's something that us farm kids have known forever. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, let's help. We've got to do a better job here, and I'm doing my dead level best, and we've got to help people understand that whole milk is not a bad thing.
Nope. Nope. It's nutritious. And
Yeah,
it's Nina, right? Is that the name that you mentioned, Nina?
yeah. What is? And I can't say
Is
her
it
last name.
But I
Uh,
heard her speak at an Animal Ag Alliance summit a few years ago. And Greg, I admit, I mean, I hadn't even thought about it. The way talks about, okay, think about to your grandparents. What did we cook with? Really?
yeah,
Whole
Right.
full fat butter, whole milk, bacon. I mean, egg. It leaves you fuller longer. And so I really do. When I think about, I wanted to bring up RFK Jr. because Greg, yes, on some things there is some nervousness, but when you think about dairy, this bodes well for the dairy industry to reevaluate, have some of these conversations again, and make people realize whole milk is good for you. Some of the butter's good for you. Dairy is good for you.
we had this whole conversation, decades ago about eggs and bacon and butter being bad for you, and it's
Right.
just I don't know how we got off on this track and whether it was the dietary guideline conversation that I think has gotten totally off track. And I
Yeah.
agree with the notion that we got to get this thing back aligned again. But um, look at butter consumption in the U.S. and in the world, for this matter today. It has been a driving force for us in the dairy industry. We've completely changed dairy production in the U.S. for more solids, more butter fat. The demand for it is there. If you look at what's going on in Canada, the reason their whole system doesn't work anymore is because the demand for butter is so strong. They have to increase their production of butter or milk for butter, and then they have all this skim milk powder as the byproduct that they have to figure out a way to get rid of. This is where they get themselves into trouble.
Uh-huh.
So, and so this whole discussion, the dairy industry is on top of it. Where we have $8 billion in new processing in dairy in the United States, 23, 24, 25, 26. Here's the remarkable thing about that. A bunch of that new investment in the US dairy industry is coming from outside the United States. It's other companies in dairy saying, we realize that the future of dairy in the world is in the United States. We want to come here and invest in this. Uh, I can't emphasize enough, folks, that this protein discussion globally is real, and we are in the wheelhouse for this. Let's go.
Yeah. Well, and I sat in on your panel talking about, you know, food security is national security. And you really got into this discussion about this is what America can do is create this protein. And dairy's part of it. Obviously, livestock are part of it. But this is how we can really make a difference. And these are the products that we see other countries really wanting to buy.
So I had this conversation with Bob Lighthizer and Stephen Mnuchin about China and beef. And I said, look, I'm a farm boy from Jewell County, Kansas. I've never seen $1 billion before, but this is $1 billion market for US beef going into China. And I was wrong. How much beef do we sell China today? Over $2 billion.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Why? Because it translates from the U.S. Meat Export Federation. They tell me they want the beef with the white fat. And as I was, discussing this with the vice minister, my Chinese counterpart, I said, look, and this was the way I thought the Chinese, the bureaucracy would understand this. This is the Mercedes-Benz of beef. We don't have to try to sell this stuff. Once you taste it, you're just going to want it. And that is exactly what's going on in China. That's exactly what's going on around the world. And that's, the export side of the business and beef is what's been driving prices. Dairy now we export 18% of our production. And so much of that is whey and skim milk powder and those things that we can export, that allows us to produce more butter. We're, depending on how you slice it, in some years, we're a net importer of butter. here in the United
Mm.
States. We import more butter than we export.
Wow.
Okay, Greg, this has been absolutely fascinating. We need to wrap things up. So my question for you, for our viewers, for our listeners, is what is the one thing, as the headlines are changing daily, the news is changing daily. I mean, you mentioned it, warp speed. It's hard for us to keep up, let alone the average farmer and rancher who's trying to, glean all of these headlines and all of this information. What is the one thing you want farmers and ranchers to know about President Trump and the Trump administration?
Mm. They're your advocate. You just need to educate them, tell your story, help them understand with regard to the immigration issue. We need folks to help us on these farms, on these dairy farms work. If we don't have these folks working on these dairy farms and they leave, the dairy cows leave the next day.
Yeah.
There's no way to deal with this. So that's just one of many, many issues where you need to advocate. You need to sit down with your member of Congress. When your member of Congress comes through your area, make a point to go over there and sit down with him and say, hey, look, I know we're moving at warp speed these days. You just need to understand this and this and this. And it works, folks. I'm telling you. These kinds of conversations, what we call in Washington, the elevator conversation, you've got 15 seconds to make your point. Every farmer in America needs to work on that skill set and deliver that in this kind of environment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great advice.
Great advice, Greg. Great. Hey, well, it's fascinating. I know you had a seat at one of the most interesting tables in trade history, and so we really appreciate you taking time
Yeah.
to kind of walk us through that experience and give us some perspective, really, on what to expect here in the next few years. Because it's not that people are afraid; we just don't always know, right? Like we just don't always see what's kind of over the hill or beyond the horizon. And so you kind of gave us a little bit of a shot in the dark on that and been able to see over the hill a little bit. So appreciate it.
When we at Aim Point Research and the West Point guys, when I worked there, we always ended the meetings with one term: attack. And I think that's my mantra these days here at Dairy and everything else is attack. Let's go.
There's an
So,
opportunity.
this is your
There's an
time.
opportunity. Yep.
Yep.
Greg, thank you. Thank you so much.
Greg, appreciate it. Have a good one.
Absolutely fascinating. I
So
mean, some
good.
of these stories you're not going to find anywhere else. I mean, just absolutely fascinating. His first person perspective that gives you perspective to this Trump 2.0 administration. I know it's not the same administration. I know it's a different cabinet. I know things have changed. What I heard a lot this week from people that were in Washington, and Greg alluded to it too, but he had 4 years. President Trump had 4 years to get a
Right.
game plan together and a plan of attack. And that is exactly what we are seeing play out with this administration.
Well, and I was encouraged at Top Producer and getting a chance to visit with Secretary Rollins. And of course, we didn't get a ton of time, but we got enough time to have a couple of quick conversations back and forth. That I mean, this is my 7th Secretary of Ag that I've been able to talk to, like 7. I feel
Really?
like that's pretty good. But they're all unique. They're all their own person. They're all different. But what I'm encouraged about her is that I feel like she's listening. And then I also feel like, you know what, she's got the president's ear. And if we, like Greg was saying, if we bring the numbers and we make the case, that she's willing to go and make the case for us. And I'm encouraged by that. I know it's early, but to me, that was my biggest takeaway from getting to meet her for just a few minutes.
Absolutely. Yep. And I mean, she, when we talked to her, there were a couple things that she admitted they made some mistakes on.
Right.
Like when we look at the federal workforce and the reductions, and there were a few key players that were let go. And she said, we're reevaluating that. She goes, even though I signed off on that, we're reevaluating that and bringing those back in. And then, we saw in the news that it was some folks that dealt firsthand with avian flu and different things, some scientists that they needed. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. But boy, a lot of things have happened since she was confirmed, and Clinton is we're on the road. I guess it would be next
Yes.
weekend to Commodity Classic.
Oh, you're
it's
excited. You're excited. You love the Commodity Classic.
No, I
In
do.
Denver this year.
I love Commodity Classic. It's a little bit different this year, the timing and the location. But it's always a good live taping, and just to hear from growers though. So I learned a
Mm.
lot from farmers this week at Top Producer Summit, just to
That's
see how
right.
they're feeling, what they're thinking, kind of just the outlook for 2025. it will be interesting to see what the sentiment is at Commodity Classic as we have all of the grain growers in the room, since that seems to be the area that's seeing some of the most pressure right now. So
Right. Cattle guys, they're hanging tough.
cattle, are you kidding me?
They're hanging
And
tough.
I
They're doing all
messed
right.
up on my headline, Clinton. I messed up. I told them at Cattlemen's, I told them at
Yeah.
Cattle Con that I was going to write in my headline that this is the whole premise of the cattle markets this year as far as prices go. And that's hold my beer. Because that is exactly
think
what the
that's
market
high?
continued
Hold
to
my
say.
beer.
Yes, exactly. I put buckle up instead, and I regret using the PG version because this market is continuing to say, hold my beer. You ain't seen nothing yet.
I know. It's wild.
Crazy.
Well, Tyne, always appreciate it. This was a great conversation.
Fascinating.
Of course, it was completely unscripted. We couldn't do this without our sponsor. We got a
Yeah.
sponsor.
Huge,
BASF. Spending some time with us.
Yep. Huge thank you to BASF. We got to spend some time with them this week at Top Producer Summit.
Absolutely.
Interesting, some of the things that they're doing to help producers this year. They know in this low margin environment, like 0% interest in things. So huge thank you to BASF. A big thank you to Greg Doud. I mean, just some of the things that he really went off record to describe about the previous Trump administration and just what he knows heading into this administration. I don't know any other word to describe it. I know I said it a couple times. Absolutely fascinating.
It's very fascinating. Well, appreciate all of you for watching, and we'll be back with another Unscripted very soon.
Thanks for joining us. You can dive into more of Unscripted on Farm Journal's YouTube channel and listen to it anywhere podcasts are found. I'm Clinton Griffiths.
And I'm Tyne Morgan. From all of us here at Farm Journal, keep it real as you live your life unscripted.
Unscripted is a production of Farm Journal Studios, where no one grows alone.